Hena Khan, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me. How are
Thank
you?
you so much for making the time to be here this evening. I am thrilled to chat with you. I know we've got all kinds of great things to talk about.
Yes.
And I always ask all our guests, I never summarize other people's books or other people's biographies because that's just asking to get in a fight.
Ah, that's a good idea.
So
Good
please
plan.
tell esteemed audience a little bit about your background and an overview of your career thus far.
Sure. Well, I write all types of books for kids. I started with Scholastic book clubs for those book of the month that you could subscribe to, and that was how I got my start in children's writing. Gosh, like 19 years ago, and I keep track of it by the age of my older son. That's how I know. And then I moved into trade publishing. I started with picture books, and then moved on to middle grade novels. I've done some choose your own style novels. I'm still doing some of those, and trying exploring different genres, and just having a great time of it. So all types of children's books from me.
You've written a Curious George, which I will promise the
Ah,
esteemed audience we will talk more about.
yes, yes. So should I tell you a little bit about that?
Oh, why not? Sure.
Okay, so yeah, it was a really nice surprise because I had written a couple of books, one that mentioned Ramadan, one was about Ramadan, the other one mentioned Ramadan, and the publishers of the new Curious George books, HMH, came to me and said, "We've seen that you've written these other books about Ramadan, and we have a series where Curious George celebrates different holidays, and we have him celebrating Christmas and Hanukkah and St. Patrick's Day and Halloween and Parade Day and all sorts of holidays." And they said, "We think it's high time that he celebrate Ramadan. And what do you think?" And I said, "I think that's a great idea." So I ended up writing this little board book, where Curious George and the man with the yellow hat celebrate Ramadan with their Muslim friends, and never expected that it would have quite the reaction that it received, but it was a really nice, I guess, affirmation of the need for books like that, and what it means to people to see themselves represented in that way. By, in this case, it was sort of the first time a mainstream character like that had included Muslims in this way, and so the reaction was just really, really overwhelming and nice to see. So that was a fun little.
What kind of reaction did it cause?
Well, when it actually became available on, I guess, Amazon, I didn't know that it had been posted. I was a writer for hire. I was, offered to do this. I thought it would be really fun, and I knew it would mean a lot to my community and also to my kids, and so I wanted to do it. But I wasn't super involved in the production. And once I had seen the final art, I wasn't sure even when it was pubbing. And when it was posted on social media, I guess somebody got wind of it. And so it started being shared and it went viral. And people started tagging me and saying, "Oh, have you seen this?" Because they knew I was a children's author. And I was like, "Oh, actually, I have seen that." And so, yeah, and then it just from there, it sort of became this tiny little media sensation. But I got to be on television, the local morning show, and NPR and Canadian broadcast, and all sorts of news outlets and print outlets talking about this book, and that was just, and what it meant to people, and just the huge reaction that I got. So gave me my little 5 minutes of fame too. So that was fun.
Well, thus far, now you're on this show. Brace yourself.
Exactly. My first 5 minutes of fame. Now I get more.
Did you not have some expectation when you sat down to write a Curious George book that, oh, this will be in libraries everywhere, this will be the book about Ramadan for a lot of young readers? Or did you not have that pressure on yourself, which might be better?
Um, I think, I mean, I'd hoped it would, but it's actually a board book, and because it was this series of, in a series of books that were already established, there was sort of a formula to them. So it's literally a 7-page tabbed board book. So there wasn't a lot of room for storytelling, but compared to the other ones, I wanted it to be more have more of a flow. And some of those, like, since it was divided up, each tab was sort of an individual chapter where, something would happen and maybe there'd be a song on one page, and even the rhyme structure might change from page to page. But I decided I wanted to sort of tell a story of Curious George and this family and his experience sharing in Ramadan. So even though it's broken up into little chapters, it's one continuous story. But since it was just a simple format and intended because of the the board book format, I didn't expect people to be buying it for their 40-something-year-old children, which is what ended up happening. I think just to what I was saying earlier about people being so excited about being included this way. They were like, my son slept with a Curious George doll as a baby, and now I want him to have this even though he's all grown up. And so stuff like that, I think I wasn't prepared for. And I was, of course, hoping it would have a big reaction, but didn't know what it would actually mean until it was out there and people started to see it.
I think if Esteemed Audience listens very close, they can hear the faint beep, beep, beep. That's the money truck, the Curious George money, just dumping in your driveway on a daily basis.
Well, I wish, except for the fact that I was hired to write that book. So hopefully it made the publisher a lot of money. but no, I mean, all kidding aside, it was huge for me just to have that reception and reaction, and to know it's in so many people's homes and that it just means so much to people. Like that's been great, apart from the money or the lack of money.
Well, no, we'll get the money truck going now, because you've got a new book, AMINA'S Song, which will be available March 9th, 2021. You've got a new book in paperback, more to the story. We're going to talk about all of that, available now, Esteemed Audience. But before we do, I want to back up just a little bit and talk about your start in publishing. I've just learned that if I'm going to do that, it's better to make sure I mention the publication date and the book before we do that. But so how does one get started? You said with Scholastic, because you were writing for a couple of different groups with them, which sounds like a really smart thing to do to launch your book, to launch your career. By working, how'd you get hooked up with Scholastic book clubs to write with them?
So it was actually through a friend. When I visit schools, I talk to kids about how you never know that the people you're sitting around right now could shape your life later, because it was a friend of mine since second grade who, is a dear friend of mine, who knew that I loved to write, who had written with me on the school newspaper in high school, and we had done lots of writing projects together, throughout our schooling. She was working as an editor for Scholastic and knew I was a writer, even though I was working as a technical writer in public health at the time. So I wasn't doing anything children's writing related. And she needed help on a series that she was working on, where she was having to do some serious rewriting, and asked me if I would maybe be able to give her a hand. And she said, you won't be credited, and we can pay you this tiny amount, but it might lead to something. So I decided to try it. I think I was overconfident at first, thinking, well, I know how to write. Like a lot of people think, like, oh, how hard can it be to write for kids? And so I thought I would try, and then realized very quickly that I was even more boring and less exciting for a child to read than the original draft. So I really struggled for a bit to try to match the style that she was trying to achieve, and looking at before and afters of other books she had edited, and finally felt like I was figuring it out. And luckily they were happy and wanted me to continue. So over time, I ended up working on my own books in the series and other series. And for me, it was a nice crash course in learning how to write for kids. And some of the rules that I had learned about writing thrown out the window, things like never use exclamation points, or in this type of writing too, it was more activity oriented and little snippets and sidebars and stories to include along with activities for kids to do. It was a lot of, drumming up excitement about espionage and about space and, different subjects like that. So it involved a little bit of research and then writing. And for me, it was just a great way to connect with books for kids and to take myself back into that mindset of being a kid and what would make me excited. And so that was, it was a great school for me to learn how to write for kids.
Prior to that, were you on a trajectory to become a writer of some kind, or?
Well, I had been working in international public health, and I was working as a communications specialist was my title, which means nothing really. And so I was doing a lot of writing and editing, but it was for international public health organizations about diseases and research that was being done. And so it was it was important work, of course, and a good type a good way to use my writing skills, but it was very different and a very different audience. And so the one parallel though was I was taking a lot of research based writing and trying to make it more accessible to different audiences. So once I started writing for kids, also I stayed in public health for a while, and I was doing both, and I realized that writing for children really made me a better writer for adults too. And especially as I was working with researchers who were so, well, one, they loved the passive voice like crazy, and they also loved all of their data and just, a lot of detail. And sometimes, the whole idea of less is more and just, get to the point and stuff like that was really helpful. And just trying to simplify things and make them more understandable. So yeah, so that's how I started. And I always loved writing. It was something that I was excited about as a kid. I wrote, like I mentioned, I wrote for my school newspaper. I used to write at home for fun, but I never really imagined creative writing as a path for me. I think, if anything, I thought of journalism as a possibility. I thought of perhaps, well, I ended up in communications work, but maybe even law school or things like that. But I never thought of writing creatively as even something I would pursue in any way. It wasn't until it fell in my lap that I decided that it was something I could try.
You were a big reader, right? Because your mother would take you to the library on a regular basis because children should be seen reading and not heard complaining about not having something to do.
Exactly. Yes. A lot of my life spent at the library, especially when I was in elementary school, especially. And I, compared to kids today, I didn't have a lot of activities on my calendar, and I wasn't scheduled. I didn't do a lot of summer camps. And so the library was my summer camp and my after school activity. And we would go with bags from the grocery store that we would fill up. And I remember going home with those bags, and that was like what I had to look forward to. And I loved it. So a big reader, a big rereader. I was one who would sort of venture into the new book section, but also always take a few of my favorites home again, so that I could have that comfort of knowing that I was going to enjoy some of these books for sure, and then get to delve into new stuff that I hadn't looked at before. But yeah, I was an avid library fan, and that particular library that I grew up going to, which was the Rockville Public Library, was torn down about 15 years ago and bulldozed like to the ground, and they built a new fancy library, and I literally cried when I saw it going down, because I felt like it was literally a piece of myself and my childhood just crumbling away. And it took me a while to accept the new library, which is very, very nice, but just felt very different. So yeah.
Now somebody's there with a bag and they're picking your books in there. They're putting them in there, right?
Oh, I've never thought about that, but yeah, I hope so. Yeah. And that was amazing to go to my public library and see my books there. Like, that was strangely full circle amazing. So yeah.
So you have siblings who were at the library with you as well, correct? Mm-hmm. Did they go on to do some form of writing, or?
No, actually, they did not. My sister was a huge reader as well. And she would just devour. She would speed through books at a pace that I'm a pretty fast reader too, but she would just be done in minutes. I was like, how is this even possible? And she's still a huge reader. She's a great supporter of me. She reads my work and gives me critique, which is lovely. But she went into science and medicine, so very, very different. And then my brothers are also in non-writing fields, but one of them dabbles a little bit, and I wish he would actually. I keep telling him that he needs to write, because I think he has great storyteller instincts and great ideas, and so I keep telling him that he needs to write something. So maybe one day he will.
Well, that's the first step toward you and he collaborating on a project,
yes,
right?
Perhaps. Yeah, that would be. Well, we might kill each other in the process, but maybe. He's my younger brother after all. But yeah,
your sibling relationship may be terribly scarred, but the world will enjoy a wonderful novel.
Exactly. Yeah, good idea that.
So when did you think, okay, well, I will write fiction, and then why specifically middle grade or picture books, children-oriented fiction?
So I think once I had that chance and that taste of children's writing and realized it was something I wanted to keep doing, around the same time I became a mom. And so I was taking my son back to the same library I had grown up going to before they bulldozed it. And I was really looking for representation that I didn't have as a kid. And, when I was growing up and I was filling up those bags with books, I wasn't aware of the fact that my story was missing or that I wasn't on the pages. I wasn't consciously aware of that. I think I subconsciously was, and I know now, looking back at even the things I wrote, that I was colored by not having seen myself. But I definitely wanted my children to have the representation that was missing, and I kind of just assumed that it would be there. All these years had passed since I was a little kid, and so I did actively go look for literature featuring Pakistani-American Muslim kids like mine, and I couldn't find anything. And it was really my son being in preschool and being asked by one of the teaching assistants during a Ramadan party to read something to the kids. And she had actually printed something off the internet about what Ramadan is, and offered for me to read it to the kids. And I was feeling a little shy. I wasn't used to presenting to kids back then. So I was like, no, why don't you go ahead? And so she started reading, and it was just this horribly boring, Wikipedia type entry about what Ramadan is, using words that kids couldn't understand. And these are 3 and 4 and 5 year olds who were just completely bored and confused. And that's what made me realize that, there's nothing that's appropriate. The books that I could find that featured, Muslim characters were either written by Muslim publishers for the purposes of teaching people how to practice their faith, like sort of like, Quran stories for little hearts, or, things like that. Or there were super referencey books like by National Geographic about, what is Ramadan, or, that type of very, very basic nonfiction book, but nothing with a story, nothing that really simplified things down to the perspective of a kid, nothing that to me made the holidays feel accessible and relatable. So for me, that was what I thought, well, we need this. And that was sort of the idea that launched Night of the Moon, which was my first picture book. So it was very much in reaction to seeing what was not in existence at the time, and wanting to really, with the school library and public library audience in mind, wanting to create something that fit that space. And when I got to publish Night of the Moon, which came out with Chronicle Books, which was wonderful, and I love them. They create really beautiful books and little works of art, I think, with amazing paper and foil on the cover and things like that. I thought, well, that was fun. I wrote a book, and even though I had the Scholastic titles under my belt, I still didn't feel like I could call myself an author. I didn't really consider myself a professional writer. And then time passed, and I thought, oh, well, the Ramadan book is great, but it's still a holiday book. Like, it would be really nice to go to a bookstore and see a book. I noticed that even on the little section that had the religious section, or whatever you want to call it, they had, books about Christianity and books about mostly, and then a few books about Judaism, and then nothing about Islam. And I realized that the Night of the Moon was a seasonal book that would be ordered during the holidays and come and go. So that's when I thought of Golden Domes and Silver Lanterns, which is a concept book that introduces colors, but also introduces things that are special to Muslim people. And I think with both my first picture books, I tried to sell it as something bigger than a story just about Muslims. So Night of the Moon was about the lunar cycle and about Ramadan, and Golden Domes and Silver Lanterns is a book, you learn about colors and learn about Muslims. And I felt like I needed that hook to try to convince publishers that it was worth something, but also, maybe to try to gain as wide a readership as possible. And so it sort of grew from that. That was sort of what made me want to publish books about people like me. And then it sort of evolved from that, and the industry evolved. And I feel like, the Curious George Ramadan book came along, and others. And then I think the middle grade novel, Amina's Voice, my first one, really grew out of it being representing the type of book I would have loved as a kid and would have wanted to have read. And in many ways, Amina is like me, a child of immigrants, growing up, although she's growing up in today's world, like, just trying to figure out life and an everyday kid. And that was, to me, really important to have that representation where her identity is not her struggle. And I think when I was growing up, the few books I did see where a person was non-white or maybe coming from a different culture or had parents who were immigrants. I felt like the common story was a bit of insecurity or self-hatred almost about, why am I this way, or why do my parents have an accent, or why can't I be like, this kid at school, and then maybe coming to accept themselves or their culture and being proud. But I felt like that was so done, and I really wanted my characters to not, for their identity, for not to be their issue, and for them to be unapologetically who they are and deal with regular kid challenges that all kids go through.
I definitely want to ask just a little bit more about representation, but first, a cynical question jumps to mind that I can't help myself from asking.
Sure.
If you have the option for 2 picture books, one about colors that can sell all year long, but one that's about a holiday that can come back every year and you can go back and promote it every year, you've got both, but which is preferable?
Well, I did mention Ramadan in Golden Domes and Silver Lanterns also.
Covering all the bases. I like
it. I mean, just because it's such an important part of the faith. But yeah, I mean, honestly, both. And, I'm grateful that these books are still backlisting well. Night of the Moon came out in 2008, so it's been around for a long time and it's still in print. And so that's amazing to see. And just the reception that these books have gotten, those 2, I think, were what prompted the Ramadan Curious George book, and it's sort of in the slow build where people, I think the industry is slowly realizing too that these books have value, that people do want them, and they can make money off of them, because obviously at the end of the day that's what they care about. So I mean, apart from changing the world and enriching people's lives, of course, but
doing it that the lights don't stay on. Sure.
Exactly. It's a business, so they need to see that these are profitable for them too. So yeah, I think I might have trailed off and forgotten your question or half of it. Sorry.
I was just it wasn't a very serious question. I was just wondering, for picture book artists who are thinking that they may only have they might only be able to choose one, is it better to have a consistent seller or get that sweet holiday seller? And every year, you've got another shot at, okay, this year we're in quarantine, but next year I'll be back at the bookstores and the libraries.
Yeah, well, I do think a lot of people, I mean, you do see a lot of books around events, like the spooky books that are coming out now for Halloween, and they're doing great right now. But of course, they have that limited time frame, and you hope that. But I think you can't go wrong with either or both.
Well, I mean, ideally, you have a nice long career and you write plenty of each. So talking just a little bit about representation, then we'll start talking about your book specifically.
Sure.
But what difference do you feel that having books about Muslim American characters would have made for you as a child reader, and what difference do you see it making for readers that are enjoying your books now? And also, what's your favorite reader reaction to something you've written?
Oh, wow. So I think, well, I mentioned that I know that it did make a difference in my life, even though I didn't realize it when I was a kid. And I think, like so many people, when you don't realize what's missing in your life until you finally see it. And I think for me, it wasn't until I was 30 that I first picked up a book and felt like I had that, what Walter Dean Myers called the shock of recognition, and seeing myself on a page. And it was The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri. And it wasn't even that, the characters were exactly like me. They were a Bangladeshi American family. The protagonist was male. It wasn't like, oh, this is exactly me. But the immigrant experience, this immigrant family, and the main character's mother was so reminiscent of my mom that it was jarring, and amazing and powerful to see, and so incredibly validating too, to see your story on a page. And it took me that long, to be 30. And even though I didn't realize it as a kid, I had started looking probably in college a bit more, and started reading South Asian literature, which I could relate to a point, but it was still mostly people in India writing about being Indian, and I could identify with certain cultural elements, and a sari or a mango, or things like that were significant to me, but it still wasn't my story. And how I realized eventually that, apart from starting to look for the representation as I got older, I think what made me realize that it did affect me was going back and reading my own writing from when I was a child. And I actually wrote a family newspaper, and I talked about what was happening in my family, and I had issues of it. I used to tape it together. It was like lined notebook paper, and I had different sections, and it was really fascinating to find a bunch of these in a box. I used to save my writing, and it was like this time capsule, going back and reading about my thoughts as a fourth grader or whatever I was when I was writing it. And what I noticed, and I talk about this when I talk to kids, and I show them actually scanned pages of my family newspaper, and how even though I had sections devoted to food and very specific aspects of life, I did not mention anything about my background or culture. So even though I grew up in a Pakistani-American household and we ate Pakistani food almost every night, there was Urdu being spoken at home. My mother wore shalwar kameez, our traditional clothing, every day. I was Muslim family, Muslim traditions, and all of that. Like none of that was in my own family newspaper. And I can only imagine that I left all those details out because I thought nobody cared about them. I wasn't seeing them anywhere else, not in any of the literature I was consuming, not in the media, not in television or film or anywhere else. So,
is this a newspaper to be consumed just by your family or for the school as well?
Oh no, this was a family newspaper that was really probably read by nobody, which maybe my parents read it. It did include a lot of hints for them. It was like a lot of tattling on my siblings and, what I wanted, for my birthday and things like that, woven into editorial letters and things like that. But yeah, it was just for fun. And, and that was where when people asked me, did you always want to be a writer? I think I did always want to be a writer, and I always was a writer. I just never thought it was something I could do. And I didn't know any authors. I'd never met any. We didn't have the internet back then, so I couldn't even check to see if an author I knew or an author I liked was alive or dead. They were just names on books for me. So it wasn't even something I thought I could do. And the only author picture I ever saw was this woman, Barbara Cartland, Dame Barbara Cartland. She wrote historical fiction romances, and my mom had a collection of them. And on the back cover of the book, there was a picture of her, and she's this imposing woman. She's silver haired, and she's wearing fur, and she's sitting on gilded furniture with a little dog. And to me, that was what an author was. It wasn't anything like me, so it wasn't anything I considered. But I think the lack of representation really added to that too. And I can only imagine what it might have been like had I seen myself, and what stories I might have felt comfortable sharing about myself in my own life. And now just to see, the other part of your question, kids react to seeing themselves. I mean, it's amazing to have kids, even when I visit schools, if I mention certain things, or when they've read, parts of my books, or they can identify with things I'm talking about, to see them, kind of bursting inside, or like squirming, or making the connection sign, or doing all this stuff because they finally see someone like themselves. And just some of the letters I've gotten about, kids saying that they felt prouder about who they were, or how they, just in their own words, they're basically saying that they finally felt seen, and how validating that is for them in different ways. So I think the most moving letter I ever got was from a little girl talking about how, she felt prouder to be who she was, and that it made that kind of difference in her life. And I was just like, wow. So yeah, things like that.
You take a letter like that and you frame it where you can see it while you
exactly.
write.
I have a special folder where I save them all. And when I have those moments where I'm like, nobody loves me, then I pull them out, and it makes me feel better. But yeah. Definitely.
I'm jealous. That sounds like a heck of a letter.
Yeah, no, it really was. And yeah, they're definitely something I save and draw from whenever I can.
So I'm trying to think how to follow up that question without sounding trite. Well, let's get to it. So at what point you're writing for Scholastic book clubs, you've got big plans to write picture books and take the world by storm. When do you hook up with a literary agent? And is it an editor first, or a literary agent, then an editor? What's the path that gets you in a position where you can start publishing these books?
So for the picture books, I was, unagented, and I was able to sell directly to the editor, and that was wonderful. But when it came time to want to publish my novel, um, I I had to go out and find an agent, and so I went through the painful process of querying and getting rejections or just flat out ignored, like many of us are. Um, until I found my agent, and he's been a great supporter ever since, Matthew LeBlanc, and he submitted, he helped me revise Amina's voice, and we sent it out on submission, and like everyone else, I got a bunch of rejections, a bunch of very confusing, contradictory feedback. Um, but but ultimately, I went through and revised it, and I have a wonderful writing group that was able to help me identify what was missing in that story. I had actually written it initially in the third person, and I think there was something just off about the voice, which was ironic since I called the book Amina's Voice. And I went back and I wrote it in the first person, and that really helped, I think. I think maybe as a novice novel writer too, I think I was telling myself the backstory. I needed to tell myself a lot of backstory. So in my first version, I had maybe too much about the parents and their immigrant experience, or there was stuff about the family room pillows, and like and things that the 40-year-old woman was creeping into the story for sure. So when I went back and just changed that point of view and rewrote the book from Amina's perspective, I was able to delete those scenes that didn't matter, and really, other than that, I don't think I changed a whole lot. Like the plot stayed the same, the storyline stayed the same, but it was just that shift in perspective and trimming and tightening up a bit. I also changed her motivation a bit, and that helped as well. And ultimately, then Matthew helped pair it up with Zareen at Salaam Reads. And when she made an offer on the book, we didn't know that it was going to be she was at Simon & Schuster. We didn't know that Salaam Reads was going to be a thing. It hadn't been announced yet. And so that information was embargoed, and it was going to be this big announcement with the New York Times. And so she made the offer, and we were in the contract negotiation when that news came out. So I learned with everyone else about Salaam Reads, and I didn't know, and was so super honored that Amina's Voice ended up being the book to launch the imprint, which was just amazing. And, to be part of this groundbreaking, change in the publishing industry, but also to launch it was just incredible. And it felt like this amazing home for my books. And, Zarina and I had a great common vision for what we wanted. So it was just fantastic.
Was it amazing and exciting when you get that news, or is it a little bit petrifying? Because you already had the terror of this is my debut novel, but now on top of it, not just am I writing on it, this entire imprint possibly writing on the launch.
Yeah, well, I knew she had other authors in the wings, so luckily, and no, it just made it so much more exciting to be part of something big, and having like started when I had, and seeing just the evolution to even believe that something like this was possible was so exciting. And it was what I hoped for so long. So I was just so proud to be a part of it, and happy to see that something like this could happen. I was so proud of Zareen for making it happen, and to Simon & Schuster for believing in it. And so yeah, overall it was just super exciting, and I'm still really, really proud to be publishing with them.
Well, now, when they make the movie version and the set designer comes in and they make the pillows the wrong color, is that just going to drive you nuts?
I know, right? They needs to be fringe on the corners. Yeah, I know. I was like, what was I thinking? And I was like, maybe a kid's room, you could pay attention to what the posters on the wall or something. But I was like, I don't think anybody cares about this. So the upholstered pillows. So I must have been in decorating mode or something at home when I was writing.
So at that moment, when the book is published, the new division is launched, do you feel at that moment that you've accomplished a big part of your mission? Probably not all, but you did it. You've got a book out there that represents a character like you, and the story is not specifically about who she is as simply as a construct, but about a character and her struggles within just being a person. Does that fulfill you? That yes, mission accomplished. I've done it. Whatever else I do for the rest of my life, I've got that knocked out. Or do you feel like, well, that's a pretty good start, but here's some stuff I want to do now going forward?
Definitely the latter. I think. I mean, it was huge, and I think I'm the person who needs validation. Like I mentioned, it took me a while to even use the word author. I couldn't, even though I had a bunch of books under my. I would say I work in communications and I write children's books. And I just felt awkward. I felt like it was braggy to use the term author or somehow. I don't know. It was strange for me. So I think for me. Having a novel that was super exciting and having the reaction that it got and seeing people enjoy it and want to read it and the state lists, reading lists and stuff like that. That was just so exciting. And but definitely I had other ideas in the works and wanted to see what else was possible. And I feel like for me with Amina's Voice, like I mentioned, I didn't want to write. And I struggled, when I was trying to get it published. I did think about the types of stories that might be more attractive initially to editors, and I even thought because I was like, this is a quiet story. Amina's, it's a lot about her personal journey, like finding confidence, dealing with everyday struggles, like, friendship changes and adjusting to middle school. And what do you do when your best friend starts to like a girl you don't like, and that kind of thing, which, and apart from having, this loving family and an uncle coming from overseas and trying to negotiate that new person and all this other stuff. But, it wasn't about, some big hot topic or, something that, people might associate with Muslims. And, a lot of the publishing I had seen even earlier about taking place in other countries or things like that stuff that focused on some of the pain issues or challenges around being a Muslim, and or gendered stuff, or just big issues. And so I kind of felt like, if I stuck some of this in here, it might get some more attention. But I really didn't want to do that because I just felt so in love with this family, and I just felt like they deserved a regular story. And there is, it's not a spoiler, I think, because it's mentioned in the marketing copy. But there's an event that takes place that affects Amina's community, and I did put that in there because it's something that affects our communities and other communities, and sometimes we have these external forces at play, but it wasn't the point of the book. It was really, for me, it was Amina's journey and how she grows as a character and how she confronts all these different aspects of her life. And so the event that happens is towards the end of the book. And is, like I said, I didn't want it to be the major plot. And it was interesting that even after it was published, some people were like, that why didn't that happen earlier? Or that should have been the focus of the story. And for me, that was really important that it wasn't. And because it was something that happens to her mosque community, and, it's in a very special place to her. And I built it up throughout the book, to show how special this place is and what it means to her family. And then when it is affected negatively, what that would feel like. But in general, I really love the idea of just writing stories with Muslim characters in them where they're confronting all sorts of challenges. So in More to the Story, for example, which is inspired by my all-time favorite book when I was growing up, Little Women. Jamila, my protagonist, is facing challenges around being on her school newspaper, which is something I drew from my own personal life. And she actually has a family newspaper like I did. And Joe March did too in Little Women, which makes me think that might be where I got the idea from. But Jamila's struggles too, again, are not, it's not an issue book in the sense of like why, about being a Muslim or about being Pakistani-American. So it's not that she's facing, racism or Islamophobia, even though it touches on microaggressions. And but she's just dealing with changes in her family and how to control her temper and how to deal with a cute boy who comes into town and is a part of her family, and when her sister falls ill, how to manage that and make sense of everything. So it's, again, not something I would hope everybody could relate to. And it's, the fact that she's Muslim is one part of her life, and people get a glimpse into a Muslim family, and it's just a layer to her identity, but it's not just about that, if that makes sense. So for me, it's really seeing that those types of stories are now accepted and desired is so huge for me. And that's what I just want to keep doing too, is just these different characters and their different experiences, and not necessarily being about being a Muslim.
Well, here's a dumb question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Do you foresee yourself ever sitting down and just writing the definitive, all right, here's all your Muslim questions answered book? Now leave me alone so I can go write about characters and their own separate stories. Like, all right, I've got that one. It's on the shelf. If you're looking for that book, there it is. Now come see me when you're looking for something that's not directly about all those things and checks all the boxes that maybe will make the reviewers happy. And like, finally, we have this comprehensive essay about all the specific Muslim issues for a teen character, a military character.
No, I don't think so. I mean, the one thing that I realize, and initially, as one of the writers, North American writers who was publishing books about Muslim people, I definitely felt this pressure to represent everybody initially. And knowing that I'm a Pakistani-American and that, I bring my culture to my faith, as well as, my own self and my own level of practice and all of that, I felt very much afraid of how my own community might react to my books, and I thought, well, maybe in Night of the Moon, like, it's not Muslim-y enough, or, the way the family is practicing, or the fact that I asked the illustrator to have the mother not wear the hijab, because in all the children's books I was reading to my son that were written by Muslim publishers or Muslim authors, but published by Muslim publishers, it was all very monolithic in the way that they practiced. And so for me, it was really important to show a different type of Muslim family that represented mine. But then I was afraid of this backlash, what might people think? And even with the It's Ramadan Curious George book, I was like, a little bit nervous about it. Like I made sure the publisher, included different skin tones and different, women both wearing the hijab, not wearing the hijab, and things like that, because I think it is important to try to represent that diversity within the Muslim, people who practice Islam. But only over time did I start to realize that, one, I was happy to see that there were more Muslim authors being published, so that was a relief, but also that, I cannot by any means be expected to represent almost 2 billion people in the world, by myself, and also just one very specific type of Muslim by myself, so these are just, some stories about some Muslim people, and we need so many more about all types of people. And that's what's exciting about Salam Reads, and that's what's exciting about what's happening in the industry now, is that people are finally realizing that you can't just check off, as a publisher, like, oh, I got my Muslim book, done, because there's no such thing. And you're going to have, all types of Muslims, all types of backgrounds, every language in the world, every race in the world. And so it's just another type of person. And I think people are slowly realizing that, which is exciting to see.
Well, hopefully there will come a day where it's just another book that happens to have Muslim characters, and when that day comes, you will know that you were a part of building the foundations for that new world, hopefully.
I hope so. Yeah.
Well, hopefully it's coming sooner rather than later. I ask all the editors and literary agents who come on the show, as Esteemed Audience knows regularly, I ask them what they're doing specifically to increase diversity in traditional publishing, what we're seeing being done, and what is the current state of diversity in traditional publishing. Where do you think we're at toward that goal of where we want to be? How far out are we from that?
I think compared to where it was when I started, I feel like we've made tremendous progress. It is encouraging to see, an emphasis on this, and publishers wanting to add diverse titles, or the fact that we even call them diverse titles, is speaking to the issue that, hopefully one day we won't be calling them that. They'll just be books. But we are seeing, now with We Need Diverse Books and, various diverse imprints, not just Islam Reads, but others and other publishers creating, this priority is huge. I know that the I'm totally drawing a blank on the name, the Cooperative for Children's Book Center, what I'm talking about, CBC, like they put out the data on on children's. Okay, I'm sorry, I've totally flubbed that.
I can't think which one. That really know this stuff was what we'll say.
Yeah. So I think I'm totally blanking on the name, but they publish data on the industry and which types of books are being published, and we do see an improvement, which is nice, or a small percentage increase in diverse titles. But I think what's interesting is that some of them aren't being published by people from within those communities. So I think that's an interesting trend to keep watching, and how many what we call own voices titles are being published, and just with I can speak most about the Muslim representation, that it's starting to expand a bit, but we still need so much more diversity in what is being published, and some communities that just are not represented at all. And I feel like now we're slowly starting to see more African-American Muslim representation, which was largely absent. And I think people tend to associate Muslim with immigrant, and that's not the case. I mean, that's not the reality of Islam in America. And it's definitely part of it, but there's native population that has been Muslim for a very long time, and the African American communities by perhaps like 30% of the American Muslim population, and we don't always think of that. As a country, we often think of people being new to our country, or Muslims being new to our country. So definitely a lot of work to be done in this area, and the need for more just more diversity of actual types of books too. Like we need more graphic novels, we need more, early readers, we need, all types of books too. It's apart from all types of representation in those books, but we just need more of everything, because there's just very little in some areas.
That makes sense. I think it was Lamar Giles, when he was on here, said that he would know that we were at a successful place when we were seeing a lot of mediocre books being published by diverse voices. Then we've got something. Lots of mediocrity all around. Okay, now we're all.
I love that. That's a great point. That is a great point, because it feels like everything has to be stellar right now to get attention. And they mostly are, and I hope they continue to be. But yeah, I see his point. It makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think obviously it goes without saying you're going to continue to write stellar literature regardless.
I'm going to aim for mediocre now. Thank you.
When you're obviously there's some similarity to Little Women. How much of a remix are you trying to do? Is it just a passing similarity, or are you trying to do some form of retelling?
So so I initially was imagining it to be much more of a retelling than it ended up being. I originally thought maybe it would be more of a young adult book, and the characters would be a little bit older and closer to the age of the girls in Little Women. And I think Jo March is 16 when the book begins. But Little Women is just this massive book, and it spans many years of these girls' lives. And once I actually sat down to try to, outline and write, I wrote, I think, the first 5 chapters, and it didn't feel right to me. And I think part of me didn't want to mess with the classic also, because I'm a purist, and I love that book so much, and to the point where, people would talk about their different favorite film adaptations, and I hated all of them until the most
recent with Meryl Streep and Bob Odenkirk.
The most recent I actually loved. Yeah.
Oh,
and
okay.
I don't know if I just was being more generous because I had done a read inspired by. No, I actually really loved it. I thought it was so well done. But I think maybe that fear of also offending a Little Women fan and making them, question my intentions or why I chose certain things was in the back of my mind. But I think more than anything, it was about the voice. And as I was writing, it just something wasn't clicking, and I decided to age it down to middle grade. And in doing so, the story changed drastically. But what I ended up doing was take my favorite aspects of the book I love so much. So some of the themes, some of the, the personalities of the main characters, the relationships, and some major events too. And then I wove it into this completely new story. So it's definitely not a retelling. It's inspired by, but people who love Little Women have come back and told me that some don't realize it right away. So I don't tell people until, well, people know if they've, listened to your podcast, for example, but I don't,
Well,
I don't
it's in
put it
the
up
book's
as
description.
yeah, well, yeah. And
Buy a
but on the
Food
book jacket, it doesn't actually say, does it? Well, maybe in the praise or the blurbs it does, but in the actual description of the book, we don't mention it.
Oh, okay.
So, and I know, like,
We'll cut
marketing
this whole
copy.
section out, forget it.
Yeah. So, I totally lost my train of thought. What was I saying? I'm so sorry.
Oh, we were talking about not feeling that you didn't want to tick off Little Women fans by doing a one-to-one.
Yeah. So I think what I ended up doing is what people who tell me sometimes when they read the book that they thought something felt familiar, but they didn't realize what it was at first. And then all of a sudden they catch on and they're like, oh, I see what you're doing here, but it's not immediately obvious to them. And some people who maybe read Little Women many, many years ago don't see it at all. And others look for it, and then they find these little Easter eggs and they're like, oh, I see how you reinterpreted that moment or that scene. I also didn't let myself pick up the book, the classic, and I have an old copy that belonged to my sister, actually, that I used to read over and over again. And I didn't read it once I decided I was going to write this book. And I really wanted to rely on memory. And I mean, I read the book so many times, I have a pretty good memory of it, but I wanted to pick the scenes and the things that stuck out the most to me, or were significant to me in some way. So I really consider the book a sort of love letter to my favorite book in a way, and something that was just so special and part of my growing up. And actually, to what we were speaking about earlier in terms of representation or the lack thereof in my life, I think I really adored Little Women and didn't really think about why until more recently. And I thought, what was it about this book that I love so much? And I think in a weird way, I could relate to this family and these girls who were growing up in, the time of the Civil War, in a way that I didn't always relate to my peers, even at school, or, my contemporary peers, because as a child of immigrants, I was negotiating a different life, and my parents had different rules sometimes than my friends. Like, you can't go for sleepovers, people we don't know, or, things like that. And, when it came to dating or other things, they had these very different rules. And I felt like the March sisters were living in a different society and like different gendered rules and just, what society dictated. And I think I really identify with Jo, like so many people do, trying to push back against what was sort of decided for her and what her life should look like. And I thought maybe that was why I just could relate to these girls in a way that maybe even more contemporary fiction, or even, like I said, my friends in real life sometimes. So it was very comforting to me. And that's why I thought, maybe this would lend itself well to initially I thought, Pakistani-American retelling, because some of the traditions, even even the idea of a marriage proposal, I mean, we still have that where it's sort of, old fashioned, but it could be, set up or have families involved, and it'd be more of a, group proposal setting and things like that. So, I thought that could be fun to explore.
Well, I've talked about this on another podcast, so I won't belabor the point, but I think there's still some wisdom in that. I chose my own spouse. We're very happy together, but we are the exception to the rule. I know so many people that have chosen their own spouse. That was a terrible idea. Somebody should have stepped in and made a better choice for you.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Let's talk just a little bit about Hena Song. What can you tell us about your next book coming out here in March?
So, what can I tell you about it? So, when I first thought of Amina's Voice as a book, I always imagined that there could be a second book, very loosely. And I had an idea about, I knew her uncle coming to visit from Pakistan was going to be a significant part of the first book. And that was actually based on something that in my own life, my uncle coming to visit when I was little, and him being very similar to her uncle in that he was a bit gruff and intimidating. He kind of made my mom nervous about trying to impress him, and he was a bit more conservative and traditional than my parents were, and so that was something that we were all conscious of when I was growing up. And so I introduced a very similar character in Amina's Voice, but after getting to know him in a way that I hadn't had the chance to since he lived across the world when I was growing up, we developed this really special bond. And so I always thought it would be lovely to have Amina visit him, because that's part of her discomfort around him is things like not speaking the language well and not being as familiar, not feeling always at ease with Pakistani culture, which is the way it was for me growing up. So I thought it would be so exciting to put her there, and have her try to figure out what that's like. And so the book really gets to explore her being there and then returning, and the impact that experience has on her when she's trying to view her life here with that new lens of having been in Pakistan and connecting with this family and experiencing what that place is really like, and falling in love with it and wanting to share that love with people back home, but they may not know how to receive that message or be very interested, or they have their own notions or preconceived ideas of what it's like. So she's trying to grapple with all of that. It was just like a really a fun way to see her grow, and she's dealing with it's sort of a continuation of where she left off with her friends, and she meets a new friend, and it's a boy, and that raises its own little challenges in her life, in terms of negotiating this friendship, but also seeing her grow musically and the ways she evolves, and in terms of her confidence and how she tries to use her voice in different ways are all things that I wanted to explore. So really fun to go back and just be with that family again, and decide, her brother is a really important character to me, and just seeing their relationship grow and how, they're there for each other and get on each other's nerves, and just sort of have this very typical sibling interaction that was fun to see, and just how he turns out. And the other thing that was really fun for me was that after writing Amina's Voice and getting to talk to so many kids about it, and adults and librarians and other readers, just hearing a lot of questions and things that I hadn't thought about, things that were very clear to me. Like, for example, in Amina's Voice, the mosque incident that happens, for me, it was never important to identify who did it. And I just thought, well, the vandals, and a lot of times that type of thing is just never resolved. But I realized that for so many kids, that was this burning mystery that who did it. And when they had the chance to ask me, I was like, oh, right. I never thought about that. Kids have such a strong sense of justice, and they want to see it. So it was interesting to go back and sort of address some of the questions that I know kids had, or just things that they wanted to see, and to have had that feedback and to be able to go back and write it was really fun. And I'm hoping that they'll be satisfied.
Well, we can accept this vagueness in life because we don't have a choice, but in fiction, by God.
Exactly.
You got to give us clear-cut reasons and motivations. We need to know exactly who did what and why, and we need to see the picture.
Exactly.
So Amina's Voice, Amina's Song. Will there maybe be a third book that we can tease now? And if so, where do you go from voice song? What's the third continuation of that?
Oh, tell me, what should it be? It's crowdsource. I'm thinking about it.
Amina's blog. There you are. Or podcast.
Yes, exactly. It was funny when the book first came out. A lot of people think it's Amina, and that's a very common way of pronouncing the name.
Yes, that's the way I've been reading it, and I'm horrified to hear myself.
No, everybody does, and don't be horrified, because I took out a line in the book where she said how people usually say her name versus the way she pronounces it. And it's very early in the book where she talks about how people always say her name wrong. And I had that in there. And for some reason during revisions, I took it out. And one of the things I beat myself up about, and one of the things I include in Amina's song, is a part where she corrects somebody who says her name wrong. And it's to the point where I'm always like, do I just say Amina? You know, should I? Initially, when I realized that everybody felt so bad when they heard me say it, they're like, oh, but that's who she is. I couldn't. And that's sort of just the Pakistani way of pronouncing this name. But when somebody who, I think I was at an airport or something, somehow came up that I was writing children's books, or that's why I was traveling or something like that. And so somebody asked me, what's the title of your book? And I said, Amina's Voice. And he was like, oh yeah, it sounds, and he as he was walking away, he said, sounds ominous. And I realized that he thought it was Ominous Voice, which I thought, that's a great title for a book. So creepy, right? Sure. And so yeah, but it obviously wasn't. If there was a third book, I think it could work out really well, because in book 1 she's a 6th grader, and in book 2 she's a 7th grader. So I was just talking about how maybe it would be fun to see her go through middle school and finish middle school, and I kind of kept things a little open-ended in Amina's Song for that possibility. So we're just starting to talk about it, and we'll see. I'd love to have there be a third.
What I just heard is that you absolutely promised that there will be a third book. We can look forward to it in 2022. Mark your calendars, Esteemed Audience.
I hope so. Yeah, it would be fun. It would be fun to see her continue to grow into the person she's becoming, and hopefully I can get more good feedback to use for the next one. So I do love that.
Well, do you know at this point what's next for you beyond March? Do you have another project?
I do, yeah. So I have a series that I love called ZAYD SALEEM Chasing the Dream, and right now it's 3 books featuring a boy named Zayd, who's a lot like my younger son, and he's this kind of scrawny kid who loves basketball and suffers stomach aches and when he's nervous, and wants to make the best team in his league, but falls down a lot because he's so slight. And he's trying to prove himself. And it was just a really fun, to what we were talking about earlier, a fun family to explore and introduce. And it sort of has that sort of simple community feeling. I loved Ramona Quimby and Beverly Cleary books. And so, very family centric and neighborhood centric stories. And so I'm actually writing a companion series to the Zayd series, which will feature his sister, Zara. And it's actually a prequel to these books. So Zara's his older sister in the series. And in these books, they'll both be younger. So Zara will be about the same age that Zayd is in his series. So it'll be 3 books for now featuring Zara. We don't have a title yet, but it's been really fun to write. I just finished up the first draft of the first book, and I'm really excited to share that with readers, and hopefully more middle grade. I've got some more picture books on the horizon. I think after Amina's Song in March, the next title to be coming out is book 6 of the Unicorn Rescue Society series, which I was really excited to co-author with Adam Gidwitz. And that was amazingly fun experience writing with him. And so lots of... For
those who don't know, please tell us more about that series.
Oh, it's fantastic. So Adam is, for anyone who hasn't read Adam, and I'm sure many of you have, like he's so funny and brilliant. And the series is, it features a boy named Elliot and his friend Uchenna. And the 2 of them are part of this secret society called the Unicorn Rescue Society with a mission to save threatened mythological creatures around the world. So they have their the head of the Unicorn Rescue Society is Professor Fauna, this very eccentric and funny older gentleman, and they go on these adventures around the globe and save these creatures. So so it's everything from a bass dragon to a Sasquatch to a chupacabra. So it's really fun to see them, traverse the world and also meet all sorts of interesting people and address different, learn about different social issues in the process and different cultures. And so book 6 takes you to the Himalayas in Pakistan. And in a really rugged terrain, and they go on their latest adventure. And I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but it was really it's a fun read, and it was super fun to write. And I've never laughed as much while I was writing a book, but Adam's hilarious, and it was super, it's super funny. So hopefully people enjoy that too.
When you're coming in, you said that's book 6, and there's another author involved. A lot of that groundwork's been laid. Does that make things easier for you since a lot of that hard stuff's been done? Does it make it harder because now you have all of that you have to catch up on and make sure you kind of keep in mind going forward?
I think because I loved it so much, it made it easy. You know, it was sort of this, he had such strongly established characters and voices, and so I mean, I tried to mimic his style because to make it flow, because we sort of alternated chunks of the story. So he would write part and then I would write part, and I would try to, keep it similar, and then we'd go back and edit each other. And so it was a really nice collaboration and a fun way to move the story forward. But definitely I was a little bit nervous. I was like, I hope, this doesn't sound off or really weird or, just not like what he wanted. But he was great. And it ended up just being really, really fun. And yeah, because the characters were there. I mean, I was conscious of, and I've read all the other books, and so I was conscious of the continuity and making sure. But he was great at figuring out that stuff too, if in case I slipped up. And he was just so supportive and open. Like, he's just so committed to diversity and inclusion, and about really showing whatever aspect of my culture that I felt like I wanted to share. And that was really fun to talk through those things, and what aspects we wanted of Pakistani culture we wanted to highlight, what narratives we wanted to completely avoid, which I think is also, an important part of the discussion, in terms of how you might, even in terms of maybe trying to push back against dominant narratives that are negative, you might inadvertently reinforce them. And I think sometimes that happens. So that's something I try to avoid.
For those who don't know, what kind of dominant narratives were we trying to avoid?
So things like Muslim as terrorist. So even if you were trying to, show that that's not the case, I feel like sometimes even if you just go there, even if it's like, let's say, not in this book, it wouldn't be appropriate in the Unicorn Rescue books, but let's say a different book, you were trying to, and I thought about this, in my first Amina book, oh, well, what if, her older brother is accused of something, or called something, and then has to react to that or push back against that. It was still introducing that thought, and that was what I wasn't willing to do. Even if in the end, like, he's vindicated, or it's obviously this big misunderstanding or whatever it is, I thought I would just rather just not have a Muslim child have to see themselves linked to that narrative at all, in any way. And that was something that my editor Zareen felt strongly about as well. And I feel, really happy about that, because I feel like in general, if you try to push back against what people may think by saying, no, we're not that, sometimes they still hear the first part. And I think it's the same when, the idea of, oh, Muslim women aren't oppressed, instead of saying that, say what Muslim women are. Muslim women are educated and accomplished and, fashionable and successful. And that's what I tried to show in my picture book, Under My Hijab. And it's, not, you don't have to define yourself by negating other people's thoughts of who you are, if that makes sense. And so Adam was great, like, such just a great partner in terms of trying to pull out the things that we wanted to emphasize, and things like hospitality and, and just generosity, and just, really positive attributes of Pakistani culture. And that was really, really lovely.
I'm watching our time, and I know it's flying by. We're already a little bit past where I said we'd be calling it a night. Are you okay for about maybe 2-3 more questions?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Because I always want to end while we're still having fun.
Yeah.
We've covered all. What haven't we talked about so far? Covered it all. But we haven't talked about flying saucers. An esteemed audience knows I never end an interview without asking everybody about flying saucers. So, have you ever seen a flying saucer and/or a ghost?
Ooh, so I have never seen a flying saucer. Ghost, not quite, no. But in my tradition, there's a strong sense of jinn, which you may or may not have heard of. And so everyone I know has a jinn story of, where they may have encountered someone who may, seem like a ghost, or someone that maybe isn't really there. And so I'm waiting for the time where I have such experience, because so far, like even somebody like my dad, who was a scientist and, very, just a realist and, not the most spiritual person in terms of things like this. He had a jinn story, and I was like, okay, my dad has a jinn story, so everybody has one. And
what is a jinn story typically?
So,
how does that differ from a ghost story?
Well, a jinn in Islam is another entity. So we believe in humans and we believe in angels, and then the jinn are like another entity. So not quite ghosts, but they can sort of move between realms, and they can take different forms. And so my dad's story, if you want to hear it, which is fascinating, was that
I was hoping you would tell him, but we might not identify him, so he could deny it.
Well, and interestingly, this story is how I ended up writing Unicorn Rescue Society with Adam, because when I met him, he was talking to me about mythological creatures, and I guess the series, maybe he was talking about the series even. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was like, oh, I have a story for you, and I told him the story, and then later on we realized, well, maybe jinn isn't the right creature to mythologize, even though there is a mythology around them. Like genies and jinn are considered the same, and and like Arabian Nights, a lot of the stories are jinn related. But I still felt like maybe I shouldn't venture there because it is a religious concept. But my dad's story is that when he was a child and he lived in a village in India before partition, there was a tree. He said it was a neem tree, and which is a type of tree we don't have here, I think. And he said that there were big stones, like almost like bricks, falling from this tree, and they kept falling. And he said that they thought at first that it was a trick, and like the neighboring village was doing something, but he said these stones kept continuing to fall out of this tree, and that they would land on the dirt, and that no like dust would come up. And he said that his grandfather and like a friend were sitting and eating, and they had like little dishes of food, and how like a stone fell like right into the food, like never hit them, but it hit the food, and how there was this, all this confusion around what was happening. And he said they called a woman who was sort of a mystical woman, and she told them that these are the children of jinn, and they're playing, and they're like having a good time. And she said, you just need to tell them to politely leave. And so she did something, I don't know what, some special prayers, or I don't know, a polite request to tell them to please go away, and then it stopped. So that was his story. And he I mean, like I said, my very by the book scientist dad, told this very hard to believe but kind of amazing story, and I thought, okay, so dad's got a jinn story. And they all seem to take place in like remote places, like trees. There's like idea of like jinn living in trees, and seeing them at night, and things like that. So who knows? But I thought it was an interesting
I was just thinking,
thing.
if you're going to have mystical stones tossed at you, I would prefer they hit me and just bounce off. That way my lunch is still good. I can finish.
I know, right? Right. Seriously.
No, I worked really hard on this lunch. I bruised. I could have healed. I wouldn't have even noticed. But that's fantastic. Well, pivoting back to books and more practical things. How are you finding marketing books now during quarantine and the scare for COVID-19? Well, not the scare, the very much the reality of COVID-19. How are you finding ways to market your book and get your voice out there versus what you were doing pre-pandemic?
Well, definitely, well, I stopped traveling. So I was doing a lot of traveling before and attending conferences and getting to be in front of people, physically, bookstore events and panels and lots and lots of school visits. So now everything's gone virtual, and I'm still grateful for the chance to be able to talk to people through, a screen. But it is different, and I know people do have screen fatigue, and I'm seeing. I haven't had. I had a book come out, a picture book like The Moon Loves the Sky, come out right at the beginning of pandemic. So it came out March 12th, so that was right as things were happening. Or did I have that right? March 12th, or March 10th, March 12th. And so it was that week when things really started shutting down. And since then, the paperback version of more of the stories come out. The bind-up version of the ZAYD SALEEM Chasing the Dreams series has come out, but I haven't had anything else new. So AMINA'S Song is going to be the first since, we've been entrenched in this new world. So it is a bit daunting in terms of how different it's going to be. I'm glad to see that there's some early love for it, just excitement around it, knowing that it's related to Amina's voice, which is heartening. So I hope people will be interested in hearing me talk about it. And we're still trying to figure out. I know publishers are trying to pivot and trying to come up with new and creative ways to get the word out there. It's also a little bit tricky because things are hard right now, and the world is just seems to be this gigantic mess. And there's a lot of really big concerning issues that we're facing as a country and as a planet. And so it is kind of awkward to be like, hey, buy my book.
By March, that's all going to be sorted. It's going to be fine.
I hope so. I mean, I really, really hope so. But in general, even like buy my books that already exist, like it's like this weird balance where, I feel like, of course, I think books are important, and I'm happy to see people turning to books in these times and finding comfort in them and entertainment when we can't go out. But it's a tricky line, and I'm trying to find the right balance. And of course, I would love for people to read my books and buy my books and buy a lot of them, but of course, I know that they have to figure things out, and so yeah, We'll see what happens, but I'm hopeful about many things, and that things will get better, and that I do believe books make the world better. So one way we can.
Well, hopefully books will get better, and reach out to your local library, esteemed audience. I'm sure they would be thrilled to hear from you. My library has got most of their catalog available digitally through a couple of different apps that I can use. Or if I order my books, they will put them together and set them outside the library so I can just go by for contactless pickup for free.
Right, which is
you can't beat that.
Right? Yeah, incredible. Yeah, and I know
your local bookstores, obviously.
Of course, yeah, and then school librarians are still building their libraries, and I mean, everybody's just, I know, trying as hard as they can to make things seem as normal as possible for kids, and to share this excitement of new books coming out. And, so there's that too, and something positive to look forward to, and to, get kids excited about reading. And so there's that too, of course. The fun part of promoting is imagining your readers and getting to interact with them. That's, for me, the most exciting part. Economics aside and survival aside, but no. So I think there's that, that hopeful and I think just this industry is such a lovely one to be part of, because at the end of the day, everybody cares about kids and loves kids and wants to see them be great readers and learn something about the world and grow up to be empathetic and, warm and accepting people. And so I feel like that is driving a lot of what people are doing right now and caring about right now. And so that's nice to see. And it's nice to see the books that are getting a lot of attention right now, and with Black Lives Matter and some of the, literature that's really being showcased, which I think is so important and vital, really. So those are all great things, I think, that the industry is doing, and hopefully will continue to do. And so I'm excited in that front, but it is different for sure. I won't lie. It's different and a little bit scary, but we'll see.
You mentioned thinking of your reader. Do you have an esteemed reader in mind when you're writing? Do you have somebody specific you're writing for, just a younger version of yourself, or somebody you've met, raised?
Honestly, I would say it's a composite, and like we talk a lot about, books as windows and mirrors and sliding doors, and I really feel like for me, to some extent, I do write for a younger me and the stories that I loved reading, and I just really did enjoy stories of the human experience and about relationships and friendships and neighborhoods, and I just loved those dynamics and reading about them. So that's in mind in terms of like my taste in books. I think I keep myself in mind, and really, I would say it's probably for kids like mine, who I feel like deserve to be the heroes in stories and deserve to not only see themselves but also be seen by their peers, and as the kids who deserve to be on the covers of books, and to have like the joy stories apart from the pain stories, and to just be important and to be seen, and so there's definitely those kids in mind when I'm writing, but I want my books to be for all readers, and that's been the most gratifying part of publishing, has been seeing the incredible diversity of readers. And you asked me earlier, like, as much as it makes me happy to have kids similar to mine, or like me when I was a kid, reach out and tell me how much my books mean to them, it's also like I just got the most beautiful message during quarantine of a little girl who said she read more to the story, and she actually drew me a letter where she copied the font like perfectly from the book cover. It's gorgeous. And she wrote inside that, she read it 3 times during quarantine and how much she loved it, but also how it inspired her to write a family newspaper and of her own. And, from, her name, she didn't sound Pakistani-American. But, just to see different kids from all different backgrounds take something from what I've written, and just the connections that they're able to make, that, even though I'm whatever I am, and I go to Sunday school in my church, and I understand how Amina might have felt, going to her mosque, or just the connections kids make. It's incredible to see that they're able to put themselves in other people's shoes and relate, and we all knew that we know that they're able to do that, but I feel like the publishing industry was a little slow to realize that or accept that for many years. So yeah, definitely all of them, I guess, is the answer. I write for everybody.
Well, esteemed audience, keep reading these books, and magically the publisher, who will have made more money, will suddenly continue to publish these types of books. It'll be a virtuous cycle.
Yeah, I hope so. And yeah, there's much to be gained, I think, all around, by having books that will help bring us together. I hope more than we are right now.
Yes, no, beyond publishers' profits, wouldn't it be nice to live in a better world in which everyone was a little bit more empathetic and a little bit more understanding?
Absolutely. And, and kids, I think, have that naturally. And that's what's beautiful about it, is that it's not, not doing anything but sort of appealing to their inherent sensibility, right? They're open, and they're accepting. And I think that the negative stuff is taught to them. They're not going to think that unless somebody poisons their minds. I think so I think it's great to give them the antidote to a lot of negative thinking with great books.
Oh, rest assured, it'll be out there, probably a couple of YouTube clicks away. At any given point, they can be radicalized and be exposed to all kinds of terrible information. So it's good that they're going to have these books and a good base, so that when that poison comes along, they're going to be immune to it. They're going to have had the education they need to avoid falling into that trap.
Yeah, I hope so. In fact, actually, I will tell you, asked me earlier and I forgot this story, but one of the most significant experiences I think I had as an author was during a school visit. I went to a small private school that was sort of an experimental school for kids, and it was a mixed high school, so it was all grade levels together. And I guess initially it was kids who were sort of at risk to not graduate was the model, but they found that this community-based school, sort of I don't think it was a co-op actually, but just had this really high success rate and retaining kids. And so I was invited to speak to them, and they had all read up to, I think it was page 107 of Ominous Voice. And so we sat around, and I got to really, get to know these kids in a short time and talk to them, and, and greet them by name and have a real dialogue. And they were asking great questions, and we just had this amazing conversation. And at one point, this one little boy who had been, well, not little, he was a young man, he spoke up, and he talked about how he was raised in a family and that was very different. And he said, my family's really racist. And those are his words.
How old is the boy?
He was a 10th grader.
Wow.
And he said, and I hear things all the time like Islam teaches Muslims to hate Americans. And it was like he was being taught Islamophobic things. And he said something to the effect of, I'm just so happy that I can be here and that I can learn the truth. And it was just like everything in my power not to start sobbing at that moment. But it was just so moving, and just to see this kid who was grappling with, what he was being exposed to or being taught, and challenging that, and thinking, recognizing that it wasn't the way he wanted to think, was really, really overwhelming and powerful. So I do believe in the power of books and stories and changing hearts that way.
Well, my last question for you is always some variation. If you could go back toward the start of your career and give yourself some advice, or as many pieces of advice as you like, that would have made a crucial difference and made your path to where you're at currently a little bit easier, and might make easier the paths of all the writers that are listening, what would you go back and tell yourself?
Probably that I could do this, that it was something that wasn't off limits to me. And I think I felt like writing was this sort of club, that I wasn't a part of. And I think also I thought that writers found it easy. This is something I talk to kids a lot about when I visit schools, that for me, writing wasn't easy. And even though I enjoyed doing it, I had a lot of self-doubt and that voice inside my head that told me that my writing was garbage, or I'd use other language by mistake. And how, I needed to silence that voice over time and realize that, that was my internal, critique and my desire to write better. But, I couldn't let that stop me. But that writing for me, like first draft writing, is really painful. And it's not that writers choose to be writers because it's easy to them, which is what I thought, that they're just sitting there with a smile on their face and they're just typing and
I know a couple like that. I hate them.
I hate them too, right? But I thought if you weren't that, then it wasn't for you, in a way. And I think that held me back for a long time. That self-doubt, not believing that it was something that anybody can do, and I really do believe that anybody can do it if you want to. And yeah, and I wish I had known that earlier, because I probably would have tried sooner and thought it was something possible.
An esteemed audience knows I could never hate an author. Yes, even Ayn Rand. We love Ayn Rand here too. Where can esteemed audience find you online? Find more information about your book, follow you on social media, all that good stuff?
Well, I have a website, which is not the most beautiful or fancy thing, but you can connect with me there and see all my books and updates. I'm on Instagram and on Twitter, mostly. Instagram the most, I would say, followed by Twitter. And on Facebook, I will connect with you if you want to friend me, or whatever the terminology is. And Facebook I'm not as active on, but I do post there from time to time. But if you want to engage with me, Instagram, Twitter, or emailing me through my website would be the best way.
Thank you so much. This has been just an absolutely wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed hearing your perspective on all of these different issues we've covered. I feel like we nailed it. I feel like someone could listen to this and legitimately receive college course credit for having taken a class in publishing children's literature.
Oh, thank you. No, it was a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you for for having me and all the great questions.
Well, esteemed audience, as always, head to middlegradeninja.com for thousands of interviews with publishing professionals, authors, editors, literary agents, folks I know you would be interested in. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. And God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.